Millionaire took his new girlfriend out for dinner, but when he saw his ex-wife, pregnant, working, the skyline glittered through the wall of windows in Michael Reed's penthouse, its sharp edges reflecting the wealth and power he had accumulated over years of unrelenting ambition. Inside, the air was hushed, save for the faint hum of a wine chiller in the corner. The space exuded luxury, leather sofas, minimalist decor, and art that whispered old money. Yet, seated at the head of a sprawling glass dining table, Michael swirled his scotch absently, eyes focused on nothing in particular. The world outside shimmered with life, but within these walls, a strange quiet had settled, as though even the space itself had tired of him. Hours later, Michael and Claire sat across from each other in an upscale restaurant nestled in the heart of downtown. Claire, elegant in a cream dress that matched her meticulously manicured nails, leaned forward, her laughter ringing out softly as she recounted the highlights of their newly signed deal. Michael nodded at all the right moments, but his mind wandered, eyes darting to the chandelier above, the polished silverware, the faces in the crowd. The celebratory air seemed to press in on him, thick and stifling. Michael, Claire's voice cut through the din, drawing his gaze back. Her brow furrowed slightly. "Are you even listening?" "Of course," he replied, plastering on a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He lifted his glass, gesturing faintly toward her. "To another year of success." Claire's smile faltered, but held. "To success," she echoed, though her tone was cooler now, the warmth in her gaze dimming. As she delved back into her tale, Michael's attention wavered again, his gaze wandering across the room, and that's when he saw her. It was subtle at first, a shadow moving behind the counter. But then the figure stepped into the light, and his heart jolted. Olivia. Her hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and her uniform, though clean, had the wear of countless washes. Her steps were brisk, precise, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she cleared plates from a nearby table. But it wasn't her presence that struck him. It was her swollen belly. The sight left him momentarily paralyzed. The world around him dulled, the chatter and clinking glasses fading into a muted hum. His grip on the glass tightened, the condensation from the scotch pooling against his fingers. Claire noticed the shift almost instantly. "Michael," she said, her voice laced with curiosity. "What's wrong?" He blinked, forcing himself to look back at her. "Nothing," he lied, his voice taut. "I thought I saw someone I knew." Claire followed his gaze, but found nothing remarkable. "Who?" "No one important," he replied too quickly, his hand reaching for his napkin to wipe his already dry palm. The tension coiled in his chest as he risked another glance. Olivia was close now, her face momentarily illuminated by the glow of a passing tray. She hadn't noticed him yet, or if she had, she gave no sign. But then her gaze shifted, almost as if sensing his stare, and their eyes met. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with a history neither wanted to acknowledge in this moment. Michael's chest tightened, the weight of old wounds rushing to the surface. Olivia's expression, however, was a mask of indifference. Her eyes lingered for a beat, and then she turned away, as though dismissing him entirely. "Michael," Claire pressed, her voice sharper now. "What's going on? You're completely distracted." "It's nothing," he said again, the words coming out clipped, but Claire's gaze lingered, suspicion flickering in her eyes. Olivia moved back behind the counter, her movements brisk, mechanical, but Michael noticed the faint tremor in her hands as she adjusted a tray. She was pretending, he realized, pretending not to have seen him, pretending he didn't exist. The realization burned. Claire's voice pierced through his thoughts once more. "If you're going to spend the night brooding, maybe we should have skipped dinner," she said, her tone icy now. Michael forced himself to focus on her, offering an apologetic smile. "You're right. I'm sorry." But the apology felt hollow, even to him. Across the room, Olivia disappeared into the kitchen, leaving Michael with more questions than he had answers, and a sinking feeling that tonight was just the beginning. Dinner ended unhappily. Michael dropped his girlfriend Claire off, no one saying a word in the car. When they got home, she didn't say a word, opening the car door and heading straight into the house without a backward glance at Michael. Michael drove away in disbelief, the sharp, rhythmic click of his turn signals echoing in Michael Reed's luxury sedan as he stopped at a red light. Outside, the city was alive, neon signs flashing, pedestrians shuffling through the cold evening air. But inside the car, Michael felt an oppressive silence. The image of Olivia haunted him. Her bulging belly, her worn uniform, the way she glanced at him before turning away. That look, cold, indifferent, but somehow deeper, gnawed at his thoughts. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white against the black leather. His jaw clenched as he considered his next move. The drive back to his penthouse had been unthinkable. Instead, his hands seemed to move on their own, guiding the car through familiar streets until he found himself parked outside the restaurant. The dining room lights were still on, casting a warm yellow glow onto the deserted sidewalk. Through the window, Michael spotted a shadow moving inside. It was Olivia, clearing the last tables of the night. Her movements were swift and efficient, but even from here, he could feel the weight she carried, both physical and emotional. He looked at her, his heart pounding, the urge to go in and talk to her, fighting the voice in his head, telling him he had no right. What would he say? "Hello, Olivia. I ruined us, disappeared. And now, here I am, uninvited, years too late." The thought made his chest tighten. Sighing, he leaned back in his seat, gripping the steering wheel until his fingers ached. He stayed there until she disappeared into the kitchen, the blinkers going out a few minutes later. Only then did he drive away, his thoughts heavier than when he had arrived. The city outside Michael Reed's penthouse shimmered with restless energy, a constellation of lights against the night sky. Inside, it was a different world, silent and heavy, the air thick with unspoken thoughts. Michael sat on the edge of his bed, still dressed from the evening. His tie hung loose, his shirt wrinkled, and his hands gripped the edge of the mattress like he might fall if he let go. Olivia. The name echoed in his mind, relentless and sharp. He could still see her face, older, more tired, yet unchanged in ways that mattered, and the curve of her belly. That image struck him like a blow to the chest every time it resurfaced. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. Sleep felt impossible. His mind refused to let go of the details. The way her eyes hardened when they met his, the flicker of something, hurt, anger, before she turned away. The clock ticked past 2 a.m. when he finally gave up on the idea of rest. Instead, he paced the living room, his bare feet silent on the cold hardwood floors. He poured himself a drink, then set it down untouched, staring instead at the skyline. The view was spectacular, but tonight it felt hollow, like everything else in his life. Memories surfaced, unbidden and sharp-edged. They'd met at a gala years ago. Michael had just started climbing the corporate ladder, his ambition burning like a flame that consumed everything in its path. Olivia was different then, vibrant, full of life and ideas. She'd been a marketing strategist with big dreams and even bigger energy. He remembered being drawn to her immediately, not just for her beauty, but for the way she saw the world. Bold, unafraid, endlessly curious. "You think too small," she'd teased him during their first real conversation. They were standing by the bar, her fingers tracing the rim of a glass of champagne. You're aiming for success, but what about significance? It wasn't a question he'd expected, and that intrigued him. She wasn't like the others who flattered and fawned. Olivia challenged him, made him think. He fell hard and fast, swept up in the idea of her and the idea of them. For a while, it worked. They dreamed big, planned bigger. She supported him through long nights and tough deals, always there with encouragement or sharp, necessary honesty. But as his career soared, so did the demands on his time. The late nights turned into endless business trips. Dinners together became meetings with clients. Olivia's laughter, once so common, began to fade. He remembered her standing in the doorway of his home office one night, arms crossed. "Michael, I feel like I'm married to a ghost," she'd said quietly. "I'm doing this for us," he had replied, not even looking up from his laptop. "For us, or for you?" she'd asked, and the question lingered long after she left the room. A sharp buzz brought him back to the present. His phone vibrated on the coffee table. Michael hesitated, then picked it up, dialing the only person he trusted with this, Ethan. Ethan answered on the second ring, his voice groggy but alert. "Michael, what's going on? It's late." "I need your help," Michael said, pacing again. "It's about Olivia." There was a pause. "Olivia? You haven't mentioned her in years. What's going on?" "I saw her tonight," Michael admitted, running a hand down his face. "She's pregnant." Ethan didn't respond immediately. When he did, his tone was careful. "Michael, are you sure this is something you want to dig into? You walked away from that chapter of your life for a reason." "I didn't walk away," Michael snapped, the words sharper than he intended. "I ruined it. There's a difference." Another pause. "What do you want me to do?" "I need to know how she's doing," Michael said. "Where she's living. If she's alone." His voice softened. "If she's okay." Across town, Olivia sat in the back room of the restaurant, her shift finally over. Amanda, her co-worker and closest confidant, handed her a cup of tea and perched on the edge of the table. "You've been quiet all night," Amanda said. "That's not like you." Olivia sighed, cradling the tea in her hands. "Michael was here tonight." Amanda's eyebrows shot up. "The Michael. Your Michael." "He's not my anything," Olivia replied, her tone clipped. "What did he say?" "Nothing," Olivia admitted. "He didn't have to. The look on his face said everything." Amanda frowned. "And how do you feel about it?" Olivia didn't answer right away. She stared into her tea, the warmth seeping into her palms. "I don't know," she said finally. "But I don't trust him. Not anymore." Amanda nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Then don't let him back in. You've come too far to look back." Olivia didn't reply, but as she sipped her tea, the weight of Michael's gaze lingered, heavy and unshakable. That night, Olivia sat in her apartment, the faint hum of the heater filling the silence. She cradled her tea, her thoughts restless. Seeing Michael again had stirred feelings she thought she had buried. Anger, sadness, and something far more complicated. "Are you okay?" Amanda had asked her earlier. Olivia had brushed the concern aside, but now, sitting alone, she wasn't sure. She looked down at her swollen belly, her hands resting protectively over it. "It's not about him anymore," she whispered to herself, as though repeating it could make it true. But even as she said the words, the weight of his gaze lingered in her mind, heavy and unshakable. The next day, Michael sat in his corner office, the skyline sprawling out before him, a testament to his success. The room was immaculate, yet the neat stack of papers on his desk remained untouched. For years, he had poured himself into his work, convincing himself it was worth the sacrifices. But now, the luxury around him feels hollow, a stark contrast to the restless unease that had taken root in his chest. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. He picked it up quickly. Ethan's name flashed on the screen. "I found her," Ethan said, his voice measured. "She's living in a small apartment on the east side, still working at that restaurant. No one else is listed on the lease." Michael exhaled, relief and guilt washing over him in equal measure. "She's alone?" "Yes," Ethan confirmed. "But Michael, listen to me. Don't do anything impulsive. If you want to make things right, you need to think this through. I will send all documents related to Olivia to your home." Michael nodded, though Ethan couldn't see it. "I know," he said quietly, "but I can't ignore this anymore." As the call ended, Michael leaned back against the couch, staring at the ceiling. The path ahead felt uncertain, fraught with the weight of their shared history. But for the first time in years, he felt something close to resolve. He couldn't turn away from Olivia again. The report lay on the coffee table, its crisp pages untouched since Ethan had dropped it off earlier that evening. Michael stood by the window, staring at the city below, but seeing none of it. The weight of the unopened file pressed on him, each moment of hesitation a reminder of the distance between who he was and who he had become. He finally picked it up, flipping through the pages with a mix of dread and urgency. Olivia's life was laid bare in black and white, the small apartment in a modest part of the city. Long shifts at the restaurant, prenatal appointments she walked to alone. A picture clipped to the last page showed her leaning against the counter at work, exhaustion written across her face. The photo was grainy, but undeniable, and Michael couldn't stop staring at it. He sank into the couch, the report clutched in his hands. The guilt he'd been avoiding now settled in his chest like a lead weight. He'd always known he hurt Olivia. He had betrayed her, neglected her. But seeing it like this made it inescapable. She wasn't just a memory or a ghost from his past. She was flesh and blood, struggling while he thrived in his ivory tower. His phone buzzed on the table. Claire's name flashed on the screen. He hesitated but picked it up, forcing his voice to sound steady. "Claire." "Michael." Her tone was sharp, clipped. "We need to talk." The restaurant Claire had chosen was quieter than usual, the clinking of silverware and murmur of conversations blending into the background. She watched him closely across the table, her usual warmth replaced by something colder. "You've been distracted for days," Claire said, setting down her wine glass. "And don't tell me it's work. I've seen you under pressure before. This is different." Michael leaned back, the words caught in his throat. He didn't want to lie, but the truth felt too raw, too complicated. "I've had things on my mind." Claire tilted her head, her expression hardening. "Things or someone?" "Because I saw the way you looked at her the other night." Michael's silence confirmed her suspicions. She exhaled sharply, leaning forward. "If you're still tangled up in your past, Michael, you need to figure it out, but don't drag me into it." It wasn't a dramatic breakup, no raised voices or accusations. But as Claire walked away, leaving him alone at the table, Michael felt something break inside him. He'd been running for so long, from his past, from his mistakes, and now there was nowhere left to go. Across town, Olivia winced as she lowered herself onto the couch in her apartment. The day had been long, her back ached constantly now, and the baby's movements, once gentle, were becoming sharper. She placed a hand on her belly, taking deep breaths to steady herself. "You're getting heavier, little one," she murmured, her voice soft. "We're going to be okay, though. Just you and me." But the words felt hollow. Lately, doubts had crept into her mind at night, whispering fears she tried to ignore. Could she really do this alone? What if something went wrong? What if she wasn't enough? A knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find Amanda standing there, a bag of groceries in her arms. "You looked like you needed a break," Amanda said with a grin, stepping inside. Olivia chuckled weakly. "You have no idea." Michael stood outside the restaurant the next evening, his heart hammering as he debated going in. He wasn't sure what he wanted to say, or if she'd even listen. But he couldn't stay away. The image of her in the report haunted him. The familiar chime of the restaurant door brought Olivia's attention as he stepped inside. Her expression shifted instantly, her exhaustion replaced by guarded wariness. She straightened, her grip tightening on the edge of the counter. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice low but steady. Michael hesitated, searching her face for a hint of the woman he once knew. "I just want to talk." "There's nothing to talk about." She moved past him, her movements precise but slower than he remembered. She paused briefly, her back to him. "I don't need your pity, Michael, or your guilt." "It's not pity," he said quietly. I just want to help." She turned, her eyes flashing with something he couldn't name. "You want to help? Where were you when everything fell apart? Where were you when I needed you most?" Her words hit him like a slap, leaving him momentarily speechless. Olivia exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "I can handle this on my own. I've been doing it for months." As she walked away, Michael was left standing in the middle of the restaurant, the weight of her words sinking deeper than he thought possible. He watched her retreat, noting the slight limp in her step, and for the first time, he realized just how much he'd broken, and how far he'd have to go to fix it. Michael's reflection stared back at him from the mirrored wall of his gym, his breath coming in short, controlled bursts as he gripped the edges of the treadmill. The physical exertion usually helped him focus, channeling his emotions into something manageable. But today, Olivia's words from the restaurant pressed down on him, heavier than any weight in the room. "Where were you when I needed you most?" The accusation was sharp and relentless, echoing through the recesses of his mind. For the first time in years, Michael felt truly powerless. Wiping the sweat from his brow, he stepped off the treadmill, grabbed his phone, and scrolled to Ethan's contact. He needed guidance, a plan, anything to navigate the guilt and confusion that gnawed at him. But as his thumb hovered over the call button, he paused. He already knew what Ethan would say. Actions matter more than words. It wasn't about crafting the perfect apology. It was about understanding why he had failed her in the first place. Across town, Olivia sat in her apartment, her gaze fixed on the small green blanket draped over her sofa. It stood out against the muted tones of the room, a quiet reminder of Michael's persistence. The gesture was thoughtful, unassuming, and though she hated to admit it, it had softened something in her. Still, resentment flickered beneath the surface. What does he think he can fix with a blanket? Amanda walked in unannounced, balancing 2 coffees and a bag of pastries. "Thought you could use some company," she said, setting them down on the table. Her gaze drifted to the blanket. "Another one of his surprises." Olivia nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. "He left it on my doorstep. No note this time." Amanda took a sip of her coffee, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "And what do you think he's trying to do?" "Clear his conscience," Olivia said without hesitation. "He's good at gestures, always has been. But I don't know if there's anything real behind them." Amanda leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "You know, people can change, Liv. Sometimes it takes losing everything to realize what matters." Olivia frowned, brushing a hand over her belly. "I'm not ready to believe that yet." "Maybe not," Amanda said with a shrug, "but you're thinking about it. That's a start." That evening, Michael paced his penthouse. Messages from colleagues buzzed intermittently on his phone about a potential merger. For years, deals like this had consumed him. But now, the urgency of business felt distant, eclipsed by something far more personal. The details from Ethan's report, Olivia's small apartment, the long hours at the restaurant, her solitary prenatal appointments, were stark against the glossy, detached world Michael inhabited. She didn't need grand gestures or apologies. She needed consistency, something he had failed to give her before. The realization struck with clarity. He couldn't rebuild a bridge to Olivia without understanding why he'd burned it in the first place. The next morning, after another sleepless night, Michael sat at his kitchen counter, staring at the untouched glass of water in his hand. Ethan's words from their last conversation surfaced. "You can't fix something when you're still broken." The admission that he might in fact be broken was difficult to process, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized that his relentless pursuit of career and wealth had cost him more than just Olivia. It had cost him his humanity. He grabbed his phone and typed the name into the search bar. Dr. Arlen, therapist. The reviews were glowing, her expertise in navigating complex emotional trauma undeniable. Before he could overthink it, he booked the first available appointment. Sitting in Dr. Arlen's waiting room a week later, Michael felt entirely out of place. The minimalist decor, designed to soothe, only amplified his inner turbulence. The other patients sat quietly, flipping through magazines or staring off into space, seemingly at peace. Michael fidgeted, his thoughts racing. When Dr. Arlen greeted him, her demeanor was warm but professional. She led him into a comfortable room, free of distractions. As she settled into her chair, clipboard in hand, she studied him for a moment before speaking. "You mentioned in your intake form that guilt brought you here," she began gently. "Can you tell me more about that?" Michael hesitated, his fingers gripping the edge of his chair. He wasn't used to opening up, especially not to a stranger, but the weight of his silence felt heavier than his words. He took a breath and began. "I hurt someone," he said finally, his voice low. "Someone I cared about deeply. I prioritized everything else, work, success, over her. And when it all fell apart, I walked away." Dr. Arlen nodded, her expression neutral but encouraging. "And now?" Michael swallowed hard, his gaze dropping to the faint pattern on the carpet. "I saw her again. She's pregnant, alone, and I'm realizing how much I failed her. I don't know how to fix it, or if I even can." Dr. Arlen leaned forward slightly. "Michael, what do you think fixing it would look like?" The question caught him off guard. He opened his mouth, then closed it, unsure of the answer. Finally, he said, I want to help. To be there for her. To prove I'm not the same person." Dr. Arlen regarded him thoughtfully. "Wanting to help is a good start, but fixing isn't about proving anything to her. It's about understanding yourself. Why did you make those choices? What drove you to prioritize your work over your relationships? And how do you ensure it doesn't happen again?" The questions hung in the air, each one peeling back a layer of Michael's carefully constructed defenses. He shifted in his seat, uncomfortable, but unable to deny the truth in her words. That night, after his session, Michael returned to his penthouse, feeling something he hadn't experienced in years. Clarity. For the first time, he realized that his attempts to reach Olivia had been more about his own need for redemption than her well-being. He couldn't force her to forgive him, nor could he undo the pain he'd caused. But he could begin by understanding his failures, confronting his flaws, and becoming the man she, and their child, deserved. And so, Michael accepted that his work had only just begun. The next morning, Michael stood outside a small boutique in the city, his hands tucked into his coat pockets. Through the window, he could see pastel-colored baby clothes neatly folded in displays. His gaze settled on a soft green blanket in the corner, the material looking impossibly gentle. Without thinking, he stepped inside. The shopkeeper, a woman with kind eyes, approached him cautiously. "Looking for something specific?" Michael hesitated. "It's for a baby. Not mine. Well, maybe mine. I just want to help." Her expression softened, and she led him to a section with essentials: blankets, bottles, tiny socks. He left with a small bag of items, each chosen with care. That afternoon, he stood outside Olivia's apartment building. The modest exterior contrasted sharply with the world he was used to. He looked up at her window, wondering if she was home, then bent to place the bag on her doorstep. Alongside it, he left a short note. "I thought this might help. No expectations, just take care of yourself. Michael." He didn't linger. By the time Olivia opened her door, he was already gone, the hallway silent except for the distant hum of traffic. Olivia found the bag that evening, her brows furrowing as she opened it. The items inside were thoughtful, practical, not ostentatious. The note was simple, its handwriting unfamiliar after so many months apart. She folded the note carefully, setting it aside. Her first instinct was to feel anger at his intrusion, at his assumption that she needed him. But as she touched the soft fabric of the green blanket, the anger wavered, replaced by something quieter, something she wasn't ready to name. Weeks passed, and Michael continued his quiet gestures. More bags appeared at her door: diapers, maternity vitamins, even a second-hand parenting book. Olivia never responded, but she didn't throw the items away either. The turning point came on a crisp afternoon when Michael arrived at her building uninvited. He knocked, holding his breath, when Olivia opened the door, her expression guarded. "Why are you here?" she asked, her tone edged, but not sharp. "I heard there's a prenatal clinic nearby," he said, holding up a pamphlet he'd found. "Thought you might want company." Olivia's first instinct was to refuse, but as she studied his face, the stubborn determination there, she sighed and stepped aside. "Fine, but don't make this a habit." The clinic was sterile and quiet, the air tinged with antiseptic. Michael sat beside Olivia, his hands clasped in his lap. When the technician placed the Doppler against her belly, the sound of the baby's heartbeat filled the room. Steady, strong, impossibly real. Michael's breath caught. He turned to Olivia, his expression raw. "That's him?" he whispered, as if louder words would break the moment. Olivia nodded, her own emotions carefully held in check. But something shifted in her gaze, something that said she'd seen the sincerity in his reaction, even if she wasn't ready to acknowledge it yet. That night, Michael sat alone in his apartment, replaying the sound of the heartbeat in his mind. It wasn't just a sound, it was a promise, a chance to be someone better, even if he didn't yet know how. Across town, Olivia rested on her couch, her fingers brushing the soft green blanket. She wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. But for the first time, she wondered if she might one day try. Olivia stood in the small room she'd transformed into a nursery. The faded yellow walls had been cleaned and patched with care, though the cracks still showed in places. A simple crib stood against the far wall, its wood scuffed but sturdy. Above it, she'd hung a string of paper stars she'd made herself, their edges slightly uneven, but charming. A stack of neatly folded onesies sat on a narrow shelf, along with a single stuffed rabbit whose fur was worn but soft. She exhaled, resting her hands on her belly. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. The sound of a knock startled her. She turned to find Michael standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. She had invited him reluctantly, more out of exhaustion than desire. But seeing him here, in this space, felt surreal. "You can come in," she said, her voice quieter than intended. Michael stepped inside, his gaze sweeping over the room. It wasn't the sleek, designer-perfect nursery he might have imagined, but there was something deeply personal about it. The paper stars caught his attention first, then the crib. He noticed the small details, the uneven paint along the baseboards, the faint scent of lavender from a candle on the windowsill. "You did all this yourself," he said finally, his voice low. Olivia shrugged, brushing her fingers against the edge of the crib. "I had to. No one else was going to." He wanted to say something, but the words felt heavy in his throat. Instead, he reached out and touched one of the paper stars, letting it spin gently on its string. "It's beautiful," he said, and for once he meant it. Olivia didn't reply. She leaned against the wall, watching him. There was a weight in her chest she hadn't been able to shake since he'd come back into her life. A mix of anger, sadness, and something she didn't want to name. "Why are you doing this, Michael?" she asked, her tone sharp enough to cut through the quiet. "What do you think you're going to fix by showing up now?" He turned to face her, his hands falling to his sides. "I don't think I can fix anything," he admitted, "but I can try to make it better." She laughed bitterly, shaking her head. "You think showing up with baby blankets and apologies changes anything? Do you even understand what you put me through? What you left me with?" Michael stepped closer, his voice soft but firm. "No, I don't. Not fully. But I know I was selfish. I know I hurt you in ways I can't undo. And I know that the person I was, the person who did those things, isn't someone I ever want to be again." Olivia stared at him, her arms crossed protectively over her belly. "You made me feel like I was nothing," she said, her voice cracking. "Like all the things I gave up for you didn't matter. And when it all fell apart, you just left." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He looked down, his jaw tightening. "I know," he said quietly, "and I hate myself for it. I was too blind, too wrapped up in my own world to see what I had until it was gone." For a moment, the room was silent, except for the faint creak of the floorboards beneath their feet. Then Olivia spoke again, her voice softer this time. "Why now, Michael? Why come back?" He looked up, meeting her gaze. "Because I saw you," he said simply, "and I realized I couldn't keep running from the mess I made. I want to be better, Olivia, not for me, for you, for him." Her hand instinctively went to her belly, and she looked away, her defenses crumbling just slightly. The baby kicked then, a sharp, distinct movement, and she winced, her free hand bracing against the wall. "Are you okay?" Michael asked, stepping closer. She nodded, her hand still on her belly. After a moment, she hesitated, then reached for his hand. "Here," she said, guiding him gently. "Feel that." Michael froze as his hand rested against her stomach. Then he felt it, a small but unmistakable movement beneath his palm. His breath caught, and he looked at her, his expression filled with awe. "Is that him?" he whispered. Olivia nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line as she fought back tears. For the first time, the weight between them felt lighter, the distance a little smaller. Michael didn't say anything more. He didn't need to. In that moment, the fragile connection between them began to rebuild, piece by tentative piece. And for the first time in years, Olivia let herself believe, just a little, that things might one day be different. The days following Michael's visit to Olivia's nursery were marked by a tentative shift between them. Neither spoke of the vulnerability they had shared, but it lingered in the air like the faint scent of lavender in her apartment. Michael found himself replaying that moment, her hand guiding him to feel their son's kick, the unspoken emotion in her eyes. As he paced the length of his penthouse late at night, his phone vibrated on the kitchen counter, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was an unfamiliar number flashing on the screen. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello," Michael answered. "This is Amanda, Olivia's friend. I have something to tell you," Amanda said. "Michael," Amanda's voice was brisk, but not unkind. "Olivia's been having a rough week. She won't tell you, but I thought you should know." His grip tightened on the phone. "What's going on?" "She's been overworking herself," Amanda said with a sigh. "I've tried to get her to slow down, but you know how stubborn she is." Michael nodded to himself, already reaching for his coat. "Thanks for letting me know." When the call ended, without any hesitation, Michael quickly grabbed the car key, his feet moving quickly towards the car, driving away resolutely. When Olivia opened the door later that evening, her brows knitted in confusion at the sight of Michael standing there, holding a takeout bag. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her tone more resigned than surprised. "You need to eat," he said simply, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. He placed the food on her kitchen counter, the aroma of warm soup filling the small space. "Amanda told me you've been pushing yourself too hard." Olivia crossed her arms, leaning against the doorway. "I don't need you checking up on me." "I'm not checking up," Michael said, his voice calm. "I'm helping." She opened her mouth to argue, but stopped when her stomach grew audibly. Her cheeks flushed, and Michael allowed himself a small smile. Wordlessly, she sat at the table, eyeing him warily as he placed the food in front of her. As she ate, the silence between them softened. Michael sat across from her, his presence unobtrusive, but steady. It was a quiet act of support, one that didn't demand acknowledgement, but was impossible to ignore. Finally, Olivia put her spoon down and looked at him. "You don't have to keep doing this, you know." "Doing what?" Michael asked, meeting her gaze. "Showing up," she said, her voice quieter now. "Trying so hard. It doesn't change anything." Michael exhaled, leaning forward slightly. "I know it doesn't fix the past, but I'm not trying to fix it. I'm trying to be better. For you. For him." Olivia's expression flickered with something unreadable before she looked away. "It's exhausting," she admitted after a moment. "Letting you back in." Michael nodded, his voice soft. "I know. And I don't expect it to be easy. But I'm not going anywhere." The next day, Michael found himself at a hardware store, staring at rows of paint swatches. He had no idea what he was looking for, only that the faded yellow walls of Olivia's nursery had lingered in his mind since his visit. After some distractions, he picked a calming shade of blue and gathered the supplies, his movements deliberate. When he knocked on Olivia's door later that evening, she opened it with a puzzled look. "What's all this?" she asked, gesturing to the paint cans and brushes in his hands. "You said you had to do it all yourself," Michael replied, stepping inside. "So let me help." She hesitated, her arms crossed. "I didn't ask for help." "I know," he said, setting the supplies down. "But I'm offering." Olivia sobbed, shaking her head, but there was no anger in her voice. "Fine. But if you ruin anything, you'll clean it up." The hours that followed were filled with the sound of brushes against walls, quiet conversation, and the occasional laugh. Michael worked carefully, his movements precise, as he painted over the cracks and patches in the nursery. Olivia sat on the edge of the crib, her hands resting on her belly as she watched him. "You're not terrible at this," she admitted grudgingly, Michael touched over his shoulder, a faint smile tugging at his lips. High praise. As the room began to transform, Olivia found herself relaxing in his presence. She hadn't realized how much she had been holding on to, resentment, anger, fear, until the weight of it began to ease, just slightly. When the walls were finished and the brushes cleaned, Michael stood back to admire their work. The soft blue brought a sense of calm to the space, complementing the paper stars and worn stuffed rabbit that Olivia had placed with care. It looks better, Olivia said, her tone reluctant but sincere. Michael nodded, his gaze fixed on the crib. It's a good start. As he turned to leave, Olivia stopped him. Michael, she said hesitantly. When he looked at her, she took a deep breath. Thank you. He smiled, the sincerity in her voice grounding him. Any time. That night, Olivia lay awake in her bed, staring at the freshly painted walls of the nursery. The color felt like a promise, one she wasn't ready to fully believe yet, but one that brought her a measure of comfort. And in his own apartment, Michael sat on his couch, exhaustion settling over him like a blanket. For the first time in years, he felt like he was moving in the right direction, however slowly. It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't certainty, but it was progress. And for now, that was enough. The phone rang in Michael's penthouse, its sharp tone cutting through the late-night stillness. He glanced at the clock, just past 1 a.m., and frowned before answering. Hello? It's Amanda, a familiar voice said, hurried and breathless. Olivia's in labor. She's at St. Luke's Hospital. I thought you'd want to know. Michael's stomach clenched. I'll be there, he said, already grabbing his keys. The drive to the hospital was a blur, the city's empty streets flashing past as his mind raced. The fear of being too late gnawed at him. He needed to be there. For her. For their son. When he arrived, Amanda met him in the hallway outside Olivia's room. She looked tired, but determined, her arms crossed as though bracing herself. She doesn't know I called you, she admitted, and she might not be thrilled to see you. Michael nodded. I don't care if she's angry. I'm not leaving. Inside the room, Olivia was hunched over the bed, her face pale and damp with sweat. A nurse adjusted the monitors beside her, and the steady beep of the baby's heartbeat filled the room. Olivia looked up as Michael entered, her expression shifting from surprise to exasperation. What are you doing here? She demanded, her voice strained. I'm here for you, he said simply, stepping closer. For both of you. She opened her mouth to argue, but a contraction hit, stealing her words. Michael instinctively moved to her side, his hand hovering near her shoulder. Let me help, he murmured. She hesitated, but nodded, too exhausted to fight. The hours stretched on, each contraction pulling Olivia closer to the edge of her strength. Michael stayed by her side, holding her hand when she let him, offering quiet encouragement when she didn't. The vulnerability in her eyes shook him to his core. He had never seen her like this, so fierce and fragile all at once. You're doing amazing, he said softly as another contraction passed. Just a little longer. She shot him a tired glare, but didn't pull her hand away. If you say that again, she muttered through gritted teeth, I might kill you. Michael smiled faintly, but the humor couldn't mask the ache in his chest. He hated seeing her in pain, knowing there was nothing he could do to take it away. Hours dragged by, and Olivia's energy ebbed as each contraction brought her closer to the edge. She clung to the last reserves of her strength as the doctor's voice rang out. One more push, Olivia! You're almost there! Her body screamed in protest, but she summoned everything she had left, letting out a cry of determination as she bore down. For a brief, almost deafening moment, the room fell silent. Then, the sharp, piercing wail of a newborn filled the air. Michael watched, breathless, as the doctor lifted the tiny, wriggling baby into view. The nurse wrapped him in a soft blanket before placing him gently in Olivia's arms. She stared down at their son, her exhaustion melting into something softer, more radiant. Her fingers traced the delicate curve of his cheek, her lips trembling as she whispered, "Theodore." Michael stood frozen, his chest tight as he took in the scene. Then Olivia looked up, her expression unreadable, and held him out. "Do you want to hold him?" His hands trembled as he took the tiny bundle, cradling Theodore like he might break. The baby's warmth seeped into his skin, and for a moment, the world stopped. "Hi, little one," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm your dad." The words felt both foreign and familiar, a promise and a plea. He looked at Olivia, his eyes shining. "Thank you," he said softly, "for him, for letting me be here." She nodded, leaning back against the pillows. "You earned it," she murmured, her voice weary but kind. "But don't think for a second this means I trust you completely." Michael smiled, his grip on Theodore tightening slightly. "I wouldn't expect you to," he said, "but I'll prove it. To you and to him." Later, as Olivia drifted into a light sleep, Michael sat in a chair beside her bed, Theodore still nestled in his arms. The baby's tiny fingers curled around his thumb, a gesture so small yet so profound it nearly undid him. He thought of all the moments he'd missed, all the ways he'd failed. But now, holding his son, he felt something he hadn't in years: hope. When Olivia stirred and opened her eyes, she watched him for a moment before speaking. "Michael," she said softly, "I'm giving you a chance. Don't waste it." He met her gaze, his voice steady. "I won't." For the first time, the distance between them felt bridgeable. In that small hospital room, surrounded by the hum of monitors and the quiet breaths of their newborn, they took their first real step towards something new. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start, and for now, that was enough. The days following Theodore's birth were a delicate balancing act. The hospital room, once filled with the intensity of labor, now held a fragile peace. Olivia rested as much as she could, her body still recovering. Theodore slept in the bassinet by her bed, his small, steady breaths grounding her in the present. Michael had stayed at the hospital longer than Olivia expected, taking quiet shifts holding Theodore when she needed rest. He didn't push conversation, didn't ask for forgiveness. He simply stayed. And for Olivia, that was enough for now. Back at her apartment, life began to adjust to its new rhythm. The once quiet space was now filled with soft cries, the shuffle of feet, and the hum of the baby monitor. Michael, despite Olivia's reservations, became a regular presence. He showed up each morning with breakfast, groceries, or simply a steady willingness to help. But Olivia's walls hadn't fully come down. She watched him carefully, her defenses always at the ready. When Theodore cried in the middle of the night, Michael was quick to respond, sometimes even before Olivia could reach the crib. She couldn't deny his effort, but doubt still lingered. Was this just a phase, she wondered? What happens when things get hard? One evening, as Theodore napped, Olivia sat across from Michael at the kitchen table. The silence between them was heavy, but not uncomfortable. She sipped her tea, her eyes narrowing slightly as she studied him. "Why are you doing this, Michael?" she asked, breaking the quiet. Michael set down the bottle he'd been cleaning. "Because I need to," he said simply. "For you, for Theodore, for myself." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "That's not an answer." He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I can't change the past, Olivia. I know that." but I can try to make sure the future looks different. Better. Her gaze softened, but her voice remained firm. Actions matter more than words, Michael. You've shown up for a week. What about a year? 5 years? I'm not going anywhere, he said, his tone steady, almost pleading. I know I have to earn your trust, and I will, even if it takes the rest of my life. Later that night, Olivia stood in the doorway of the nursery, watching as Michael rocked Theodore to sleep. His movements were slow and deliberate, his voice low as he hummed a soft tune. In the dim light, he looked different, less polished, more human. For the first time, Olivia allowed herself to imagine a future where Michael stayed, not just for Theodore, but for her. The thought was both terrifying and comforting. She wasn't ready to let go of her doubts entirely, but she couldn't deny the hope quietly growing in the space between them. The early mornings came with their own rhythm now, a mix of soft cries, sleepy murmurs, and the gentle creak of the nursery door. Michael had never thought of himself as a man who would change diapers at 4 a.m., but here he was, cradling Theodore in one arm while expertly managing a bottle with the other. "Good morning, buddy," he whispered, his voice low and steady in the dim light. Theodore's tiny fingers curled against Michael's shirt, his wide eyes blinking up at his father. In these quiet moments, Michael felt the weight of his failures recede, replaced by something deeper, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just about making amends anymore. It was about being present, truly present, for the life he'd helped create. Olivia watched from the hallway, her arms crossed loosely over her chest. She didn't step in or interrupt. She simply observed. Over the past weeks, Michael had thrown himself into fatherhood with a focus and determination that surprised her. She'd waited for cracks to show, for him to lose interest or falter under the reality of late nights and endless feedings. But so far, he hadn't. If anything, he seemed to thrive on it. She wanted to believe this version of Michael was real, but a lifetime of disappointments made her hesitant. Later that morning, as Theodore napped, Olivia found herself sitting across from Michael at the small kitchen table. A plate of toast sat untouched in front of her. "You're really trying, aren't you?" she asked, her voice tentative. Michael looked up from his coffee, startled by the sudden directness of her tone. "I am," he said, meeting her gaze. "I know I've failed you before, but this is different. I'm different." Olivia studied him, searching for any hint of insincerity. "It's not just about Theodore," she said finally. "You have to understand that. If you're going to be here, it's for both of us, not just him." Michael nodded slowly, his expression serious. "I know. And I want to be here. For you and for him. Whatever it takes." Over the next few weeks, Michael's commitment didn't waver. He showed up, always. He was there for the late-night feedings, the doctor's appointments, even the diaper blowouts that had Olivia laughing and Theodore crying simultaneously. Their conversations grew easier, more natural. Olivia started to share more about her fears for the future, her frustrations with balancing everything on her own, and even her lingering anger toward Michael. He listened, never defensive, always patient. One evening, as they sat on the couch with Theodore dozing between them, Olivia glanced at Michael. "You know," she began, her voice soft, "I didn't think you could do this. Be this person." Michael's brow furrowed, but he nodded. "I didn't think I could either," he admitted, "but I'm trying. Every day." Olivia looked down at Theodore, her hand brushing against his tiny fist. "It's a start," she said, her tone measured, "but there's still a long way to go." The true test came when Michael's assistant called late one afternoon. Olivia was in the nursery with Theodore when she heard Michael's voice rise slightly, a rare occurrence since his return. She moved closer to the door, listening as his tone shifted between frustration and resolve. "I'm not missing this," he said firmly. "Reschedule the meeting. Push the deal back if you have to." There was a pause, followed by a quieter, more measured tone. "Yes, I understand. But this is more important." When Michael finally stepped into the nursery, his shoulders were tense, but his expression was calm. Olivia raised an eyebrow. "What was that about?" "A deal I've been working on," Michael replied, sitting down in the chair by the crib. "They wanted me to fly out tomorrow to finalize it." "And?" she prompted. "And I told them no," he said simply. "I'm not leaving. Not now." Olivia blinked, surprised by the ease with which he said it. "That deal was important to you." "You and Theodore are more important," he said, meeting her gaze without hesitation. That evening, as Olivia tucked Theodore into his crib, she found herself thinking about the man Michael had become. She still didn't fully trust him, but moments like these made it harder to keep her walls up. When she walked into the living room, Michael was there, tidying up the remnants of their dinner. He glanced up as she entered, his expression hopeful. "Thank you," she said, her voice quieter than she intended. "For what?" he asked, setting the dish down. "For staying. For proving me wrong," she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Michael didn't respond right away. Instead, he stepped closer, his voice steady. "I'll keep proving it," he said, "for as long as it takes." For the first time, Olivia felt the tension between them begin to truly ease. The path forward wasn't clear, and the past still loomed. But for now, she let herself believe they could build something new. Together. The living room was quiet, save for the faint hum of the dishwasher in the kitchen. Olivia leaned against the arm of the couch, her arms crossed, watching Michael as he sat on the floor playing with Theodore. The baby babbled happily, stacking colorful blocks that immediately tumbled down, eliciting peals of laughter. Michael chuckled along, his patience unyielding as he rebuilt the tower for the 5th time. Olivia sighed softly, her thoughts heavy. For weeks now, Michael had been consistent, present, involved, and surprisingly adept at the chaos of parenting. Yet, a gnawing doubt remained, a whisper that kept her from fully letting go. It wasn't about his efforts, which were clear. It was about whether those efforts would last. As if sensing her tension, Michael looked up. "What's on your mind?" he asked, his voice even. Olivia hesitated, debating whether to say what she'd been holding back. Finally, she straightened and stepped closer. "You're trying to take over," she said bluntly, "with Theodore, with everything." Michael blinked, caught off guard. "What? I'm just helping," she interrupted, her tone sharp. "I know, but it feels like more than that, like you're trying to control things again, the way you used to." The weight of her accusation hung between them. Michael's expression shifted from confusion to hurt. "That's not fair," he said quietly. "I'm trying to be a part of this family, Olivia. Isn't that what you wanted?" She crossed her arms tighter, her voice tinged with frustration. "I don't know what I want anymore, Michael. Every time I start to trust you, I remember how it felt when you left, how you made all the decisions, and I just disappeared." Michael stood, his posture tense but composed. "I'm not that man anymore," he said, his voice low but firm. "I've spent every day trying to prove that to you. But I can't change the past, Olivia. If you can't let it go, I don't know what else I can do." That night, Olivia sat at the kitchen table with Amanda, a cup of tea cradled in her hands. The argument with Michael replayed in her mind, leaving her feeling raw and conflicted. Amanda, ever direct, leaned forward. "Okay, spill. What's going on?" Olivia sighed. "He's trying so hard, Amanda, and I see it. I do. But every time I think about trusting him again, I feel like I'm setting myself up to get hurt." Amanda nodded thoughtfully. "Look, I get it. He screwed up badly. But from what I've seen, he's not just talking the talk. He's showing up every day. That's more than a lot of people would do." "But what if it's not enough?" Olivia murmured, her voice almost a whisper. Amanda placed a hand on hers. "Then it's up to you to decide if you can let go of the past long enough to give him a real chance. Not for him, but for you. And for Theodore." Meanwhile, Michael sat in Ethan's office, a tumbler of untouched scotch on the table between them. Ethan leaned back in his chair, watching his friend with a mixture of sympathy and exasperation. "You're doing everything right, Michael," Ethan said. "But forgiveness isn't something you can force. You know that, don't you?" Michael nodded slowly, his jaw tight. "I know. I thought we were making progress, and then tonight it felt like we were back at square one." Ethan shrugged. "Progress isn't a straight line. Keep doing what you're doing. Be consistent. She'll see it eventually." Michael exhaled deeply, his shoulders sagging. "I hope you're right." The turning point came the following evening. Olivia stood in the doorway of the nursery, unnoticed by Michael, who was kneeling beside Theodore's crib. The baby was crying, his tiny fists waving in frustration. But Michael didn't lose his patience. He hummed softly, rubbing Theodore's back and whispering soothing words until the cries softened into hiccups. "There you go, little man," Michael murmured, brushing a hand over Theodore's hair. "You're okay. I've got you." Olivia felt something shift inside her as she watched. This wasn't the Michael she'd known before, the one who always seemed too busy, too distracted. This Michael was calm, steady, and present in a way she hadn't believed he could be. She stepped into the room, her voice breaking the silence. "You're good with him." Michael glanced up, surprised but grateful for the acknowledgement. "I'm trying," he said simply. She hesitated, then nodded. "I see that." Later that night, as she lay in bed, Olivia found herself replaying the moment in the nursery. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that Michael's transformation was real. Not perfect, but genuine. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a start. And for now, that was enough. Theodore's giggles echoed through the room as Michael gently lifted him into the air, the boy's small hands reaching out as if trying to grab the ceiling. "Hiya, Daddy!" Theodore squealed, his voice bubbling with laughter. Michael smiled, his heart swelling at the sound. Moments like these, fleeting but full of life, were what he lived for now. Yet, as he set Theodore back down, his gaze flickered toward the empty doorway. Olivia wasn't there, but he felt the weight of her absence all the same. For a certainty, a rearrangement which was clear. Michael would visit Theodore 3 days a week and every other weekend. Olivia insisted it was the best way to maintain boundaries while allowing Michael to remain present in their son's life. While Michael agreed, the reality of those boundaries cut deeper than he'd expected. On his non-visitation days, he found himself replaying every moment spent with Theodore. He kept his phone close, hoping for updates from Olivia, a photo, a text, anything to bridge the gap. But Olivia's messages were brief and factual, her tone distant. For Olivia, the arrangement felt like walking a tightrope. She wanted Theodore to have his father in his life, but the vulnerability of opening that door came with constant reminders of the pain Michael had caused. Independence had become her armor, and she clung to it, even as she questioned whether it was truly what was best for their family. One evening, Amanda stopped by, a bottle of wine in hand. As they sat on the couch, Olivia voiced her unease. "I'm doing the right thing, right? Keeping things separate?" Amanda tilted her head thoughtfully. "I think the question is, are you doing this for Theodore, or are you doing it because you're afraid?" Olivia sighed, swirling the wine in her glass. "Both," she admitted. "I don't want to depend on Michael again. I can't." Amanda placed a hand on Olivia's arm. "But Theodore depends on both of you. And from what I've seen, Michael's not the man he used to be. Maybe it's time to let yourself see that too." The unexpected crisis came late one night. Theodore had been fussing all evening, his forehead warm to the touch. Olivia tried everything, cool compresses, fever medication, but as the hours wore on, his cries grew weaker and fear took hold. With trembling hands, she dialed Michael's number. "Olivia." Michael's voice was groggy but instantly alert. "What's wrong?" "It's Theodore," she said, her voice shaking. "He's burning up and I don't know what to do." "I'll be there in 10 minutes, Michael said, without hesitation. Michael arrived faster than Olivia expected, his hair disheveled, worry etched into his face. He didn't waste a moment, moving to Theodore's crib and gently scooping the boy into his arms. "Hey, buddy," he murmured, his tone calm despite the panic in his eyes. "Daddy's here." Together, they worked as a team, alternating between soothing Theodore and monitoring his fever. At one point, Olivia sat on the couch, her head in her hands, tears threatening to spill over. Michael placed a hand on her shoulder. "He's going to be okay," he said softly. "We've got this." His words, so simple yet so steady, eased some of the tension in her chest. She nodded, taking a deep breath. "Thank you," she whispered. By morning, Theodore's fever had broken, his small body finally at rest. Exhausted but relieved, Olivia and Michael sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee in silence. The weight of the night lingered, but so did a newfound sense of unity. "You were amazing with him," Olivia said, breaking the quiet. Her voice was tentative but genuine. "I couldn't have done it alone." Michael met her gaze, his expression earnest. "You don't have to. Not anymore." As the days passed, the night of the fever became a turning point. Olivia began inviting Michael to spend more time with Theodore outside of their scheduled visits. The three of them started taking walks together, visiting the park, even sharing meals. The physical distance between them grew smaller, mirrored by the gradual easing of the emotional walls Olivia had built. One afternoon, as they sat on a blanket in the park watching Theodore chase butterflies, Olivia spoke quietly. "I think we should try, as a family." Michael turned to her, his eyes widening with hope. "Are you sure?" She nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "It's not going to be easy, but Theodore deserves the chance to have both of us. And maybe we deserve that chance, too." Michael reached for her hand, his grip gentle but firm. "I won't let you down, Olivia. I promise." The path ahead wasn't clear, and there were no guarantees, but as they walked home together, Theodore perched on Michael's shoulders. The future felt less daunting. They weren't just two people trying to reconcile a broken past anymore. They were a family, imperfect, but willing to try. And for now, that was enough. The backyard was small, bordered by an old picket fence that Olivia had painted white the previous summer. It wasn't much, but on this crisp autumn morning, it felt like a sanctuary. Michael and Olivia stood side by side on the back porch, their hands loosely clasped, as they watched Theodore toddle across the grass. His chubby legs wobbled with determination as he chased after a bright red ball, his giggles ringing through the cool air. Michael glanced at Olivia out of the corner of his eye. She was bundled in a sweater, Her arms crossed against the chill, but there was a softness to her expression that hadn't been there before. She caught him looking and raised an eyebrow. "What?" she asked, her tone light but curious. "Nothing," he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I'm just happy." Olivia's gaze lingered on him for a moment before she turned back to Theodore. "Me too," she admitted softly. Theodore eventually plopped down on the grass, the ball forgotten as he began tugging at the clover around him. Michael took the opportunity to step closer to Olivia. His heart hammered against his ribs as he reached into his pocket, fingers brushing the small velvet box he'd carried for weeks. "Olivia," he began, his voice steady but quiet. She turned to him, her brow furrowing slightly. "What is it?" Michael hesitated for only a moment before pulling the box out and opening it. Inside was a simple, elegant ring. Nothing flashy, but every detail carefully chosen. "I know we're not the same people we were before," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I know I can't erase the mistakes I've made. But I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you, and to Theodore, that I've changed." Her breath hitched as he continued. "Will you marry me? Not to start over, but to continue what we've started, to build something real." Olivia stared at the ring, her emotions warring on her face. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then she looked at him, her eyes shimmering. "Michael, it's a lot." "I know," he said quickly, "and I don't expect you to say yes right away. But I needed to ask, to show you how much this us means to me." She exhaled slowly, glancing at Theodore, who had resumed his wobbly exploration of the yard. When she looked back at Michael, there was a small, cautious smile on her lips. "Okay," she said, "but on one condition." "Anything," he said, his relief palpable. "You keep proving it," she said, "every day." Michael nodded, his smile widening. "Deal." The ceremony was small, just as Olivia had wanted. They stood under the oak tree in the backyard, its leaves a patchwork of gold and crimson. Close friends and family filled the rows of white chairs, their faces lit with warmth and love. Amanda stood beside Olivia, adjusting the soft lace of her dress one last time before the ceremony began. "You look beautiful," she said, grinning. "And don't worry, if he screws up again, I'll handle him." Olivia laughed, shaking her head. "Thanks, Amanda. That's oddly comforting." At the altar, Michael stood with Theodore in his arms. The little boy was dressed in a tiny suit, his fingers clutching the ring pillow with a determined grip. When Olivia stepped into view, Michael's breath caught. She was radiant, her face glowing with a mixture of joy and nervousness. As she reached the altar, Theodore squealed, reaching for her. She laughed, taking his hand as Michael handed him over. Together, the three of them faced the officiant. After the vows were exchanged, the rings slipped onto fingers, and the kiss sealed their commitment. Michael found himself standing with Olivia as Theodore played at their feet. The guests mingled nearby, laughter and music filling the air. "I can't believe we did this," Olivia said, her tone light but genuine. Michael slid his arm around her waist, his gaze fixed on Theodore. "Me neither," he admitted, "but I'm glad we did." She leaned into him slightly, her defenses lower than they'd ever been. I think we might actually be okay." He looked at her, his expression tender. "We will be," he said, "because this time, I'm not going anywhere." Later that night, after the guests had gone and Theodore was asleep in his crib, Michael and Olivia sat together on the porch. The stars above were bright, the air crisp with the promise of change. "I've been thinking," Olivia said, breaking the comfortable silence, "about us, about everything. Michael waited, his hand resting on hers. "I'm still scared," she admitted. "But I want this. I want us." He squeezed her hand gently. "We'll figure it out. Together." She smiled, her head resting against his shoulder. For the first time in a long time, the future felt hopeful. Together, they watched the stars, the quiet night wrapping around them like a promise of all that was yet to come. The house stood at the edge of a wide, sunlit meadow, its white picket fence a symbol of the life they had built together. From the porch swing, Olivia watched Theodore, now 8 years old, dart around the yard with his younger sister Sophie in tow. Their laughter echoed through the air, a melody that filled her heart with warmth. She leaned back, her hands resting lightly on her lap, and glanced at Michael beside her. He was leaning forward, elbows on his knees, a contented smile playing on his lips. His eyes followed the children as they played, but his expression betrayed a sense of reflection. Olivia tilted her head slightly. "What are you thinking about?" Michael turned to her, his smile softening. "How lucky I am," he said, his voice low, "and how close I came to losing all of this." Olivia nodded, her gaze drifting back to the children. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" "A very long way," Michael agreed. He reached for her hand, his thumb brushing gently over her knuckles. "Do you ever think about how it all started? How messy it was?" She chuckled softly. "All the time. But if it wasn't for those messy moments, we wouldn't be here now. Sometimes, I think the struggle made it worth it." Theodore ran up to the porch, his face flushed with excitement. "Look what I made," he exclaimed, holding out a folded piece of construction paper. Olivia took it carefully, unfolding it to reveal a handmade card. The front was adorned with crayon hearts and stars, and inside, Theodore had written in large, uneven letters, "Thank you for being the best mom and dad ever. I love you." Olivia's throat tightened as she looked at Michael, whose eyes shimmered with emotion. "It's beautiful, Theodore," she said, pulling him into a hug. "Thank you, sweetheart." Michael reached out, ruffling Theodore's hair. "You're a pretty great kid yourself. You know that?" Theodore grinned before darting back to Sophie, their laughter resuming as they disappeared into the yard. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the meadow in shades of gold and amber, Michael stepped inside and returned with a small box. Olivia, sitting on the porch steps, raised an eyebrow as he approached. "What's this?" she asked. Michael knelt before her, his expression serious but filled with love. "It's something I've been waiting to give you," he said. He opened the box to reveal a delicate silver locket. Engraved on the front was the date of their second wedding, and inside, the words, "Forever. This time." Olivia's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes welling with tears. "Michael, it's perfect." He took the locket from the box and gently fastened it around her neck. "It's a reminder," he said, his voice steady, "that no matter how hard it gets, I'm here. Always." She reached for him, pulling him into an embrace. "I don't know how we got so lucky," she whispered. Michael pulled back slightly, his forehead resting against hers. "We fought for it," he said, every step of the way. As the evening stretched into night, the family gathered around the dinner table. The room was filled with the scent of roasted vegetables and warm bread. The soft clink of utensils punctuated by laughter. Theodore regaled them with tales of his day at school, while Sophie chimed in with her own enthusiastic additions. Olivia looked around the table, her gaze lingering on each face. This was her family, imperfect, chaotic, and utterly hers. Her eyes met Michael's across the table, and he gave her a small, knowing smile. After the children were tucked into bed, Olivia and Michael returned to the porch. The stars above were bright, the air carrying the faint hum of crickets. They sat together on the swing, her head resting on his shoulder. "You've kept your promise," Olivia said softly. Michael turned to her, his hand finding hers. "And I always will." They sat in comfortable silence, the swing swaying gently beneath them. The glow from the house behind them spilled out onto the porch, casting a warm, golden light. It was a picture of everything they had fought for: love, trust, and the family they had built together. The camera pans out, capturing the house, the porch, and the meadow under the star-filled sky. The quiet night wrapped around them like a promise, the future bright and boundless. And as the world continued its steady rhythm, Michael and Olivia held on to each other, ready for whatever came next.